Most people believe the richest institutions on earth are tech companies, oil giants, or Wall Street banks. But what if I told you that one of the world's most powerful financial empires isn't a corporation at all? It's a church. One that quietly owns vast farmlands, billion-dollar real estate, global media networks, insurance companies, and an investment fund so large, even veteran economists couldn't agree on its true size. And the strangest part, almost nobody truly understands how it works. This is the story of the Mormon Empire, religious institution that transformed into one of the most financially sophisticated organizations in modern history. But how did a persecuted frontier sect, chased out of American cities, end up building what economists call the most successful religious portfolio in the world? Today, we trace the secret history, the hidden systems, the cultural engine, and the financial decisions that turned the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints into a quiet global powerhouse. Because once you understand this story, your assumptions about religion, money, and power may never be the same. Before we dive into the empire as it exists today, you need to understand something about Mormonism that most people overlook. Money wasn't an accidental byproduct of faith. It was built into the culture from the beginning. The early Mormon Church didn't just form as a theological movement, it formed as an economic system, and that distinction becomes important later. In the mid-1800s, America was a country filled with new religions, utopian experiments, and breakaway groups, but almost every one of them collapsed. Only one survived long enough, grew large enough, organized itself strictly enough to become an international financial power. The Mormon Church didn't just preach discipline, it institutionalized discipline. It systematized tithing, it centralized wealth, and it protected its resources with an intensity most governments would envy. But how did all of this begin? To understand the empire, we must go back to the origins of the faith, and the moment the church realized survival required not just belief but financial power. The story starts with Joseph Smith, the young founder of the Mormon faith. Wherever he went, controversy followed, sometimes theological, sometimes political, often economic. Mormons built towns, bought land, formed communities, and practiced a strict economic unity that outsiders viewed with suspicion. Mob violence, legal pressure, and political hostility forced the early church to move repeatedly from New York to Ohio, to Missouri, to Illinois. Each time their property was seized, burned, or abandoned. The early Mormon Church learned 3 lessons that shaped its future financial empire. 1. Land is survival. Without territory, the community had no future. 2. Money must be centralized and controlled. If wealth is scattered, enemies can destroy it. 3. Economic unity equals power. A united group can outlast any crisis. These lessons became the blueprint for what the church would later build. Then came the tragedy that would permanently shift the church's direction. Joseph Smith's assassination in 1844. Amid the chaos, a new leader stepped forward, Brigham Young, a man with both spiritual authority and organizational genius, and his first major move wasn't a theological decision, it was an economic one. In 1847, Brigham Young led the Mormon pioneers across the American frontier into the barren deserts of what would become Utah. Most people saw a wasteland. Young saw a blank canvas. Here, the church could build a society free from persecution, complete with a centralized economic system unlike anything else in America. The Mormon command economy under Young's leadership. The church assigned land to settlers, organized irrigation and agriculture, directed labor and resources, encouraged cooperative businesses, controlled imports and trade, mandated tithing as a core religious obligation. In other words, the church ran a centralized economic model long before modern corporations existed. And something interesting happened. A desert with almost no natural resources became shockingly productive. Mormon communities were well organized, self-reliant, and financially unified. While the rest of the American West struggled with boom and bust cycles, Mormon settlements had a degree of stability that attracted attention even from other faiths. The power of tithing. The Mormon tithing system wasn't a suggestion. It was a cultural expectation, a divine obligation. And over decades, it created a stable, predictable revenue stream that allowed long-term planning. Meanwhile, every financial crisis that rocked the United States 73, 1893, 1929 forced corporations and banks to collapse. But the church, its centralized model, helped it weather the storms. This stability set the stage for something bigger, modernization. The 20th century brought new opportunities. Utah towns turned into cities. Church members entered politics, business, academia, and media, and the church itself began acquiring assets methodically, quietly, strategically. Real estate mastery. By the 1960s, the church had already become one of the largest landowners in the American West, but it didn't stop there. They bought downtown commercial buildings, shopping centers, apartment complexes, ranches, farmlands, timberland, prime urban properties in multiple states. And in a surprising twist, they also invested in Disneyland-adjacent land in Florida, long before the world knew its value. But everything changed in the 1960s with the rise of the church's financial arm. By the late 20th century, the church needed a modern financial institution to manage its ever-growing assets. The solution came in the form of Ensign Peak Advisors, the most mysterious investment fund in America, founded in 1997. Ensign Peak became the church's financial brain, a highly secretive entity run by professional money managers, not clergy. For years, analysts speculated about its size. $30 billion, $50 billion, $50 billion, more. Then in 2020, something unprecedented happened. A whistleblower leaked internal documents suggesting the fund controlled over $100 billion in assets, placing it on par with national sovereign wealth funds. For context, that's larger than the endowments of the largest universities, larger than many global hedge funds, larger than the GDP of over 100 countries. And the most shocking part, the church rarely spends from this fund. It continues to grow, year after year, almost untouched. Ensign Peak wasn't built to be a rainy day fund, it was built to be an eternal fund. But while the numbers were shocking, they didn't appear overnight. They're the result of one thing: financial discipline. No empire rises without controversy. As the church's financial power grew, journalists, economists, and even members began asking questions. Why does a church need over $100 billion in investments? How much wealth should religious institutions accumulate? Is the money used for charity, infrastructure, or investment? Should tithing continue if the church is financially secure? In 2019, a whistleblower reported the fund to the IRS, claiming the church was stockpiling wealth instead of using it for charity. The church denied wrongdoing, insisting the fund was used for future needs, humanitarian aid, and global expansion. Then in 2023, the SEC fined Ensign Peak for failing to properly disclose its stock holdings. Although the fine was small relative to the fund's size, it created a public relations storm. The church's financial secrecy, once seen as prudence, was now viewed with suspicion. This marked a turning point. The world finally realized that the Mormon Church wasn't just a religious institution, it was a global financial force. After the scandals, the church made changes. More transparency in disclosures, public statements about charitable spending, new reporting procedures, but critics argue these changes were superficial optics rather than substance. Why? Because the core system remained untouched. Mandatory tithing continued, the investment fund kept growing, assets remained centralized. Decision-making stayed internal, external audits remained non-existent. The church believed the system worked, and in many ways, it did. From their perspective, wealth equals stability, stability equals survival, survival equals the ability to fulfill spiritual missions. But for outsiders, the lack of transparency raised enduring questions about how much wealth a religious institution should control. This philosophical tension remains unresolved. Now here's where the story gets surprising. The Mormon Empire isn't an anomaly. It's a preview. Look around the world: megachurches in the US, televangelist empires, Vatican City's investment portfolios, evangelical lobbying networks, Islamic finance institutions, Hindu temple trusts in India, controlling billions. Religion, in the 21st century, is becoming one of the fastest growing economic sectors on the planet, and the LDS Church is simply the most advanced version or model of what religious institutions may look like in the future. Centralized, efficient, global, financially powerful, and increasingly corporate. But let's add one more layer. Patterns that echo across history. Throughout time, the Catholic Church acquired vast landholdings in the Middle Ages. Buddhist monasteries in China once held economic dominance. Islamic Waqf trusts funded universities, hospitals, and cities. Hindu temples in South India functioned like ancient banks. Whenever religion organizes around discipline and centralization, economic power follows. The Mormon Empire is not new. It's the newest version of an old pattern. Faith becomes wealth. Wealth becomes influence. Influence becomes power. And history shows that such systems rarely shrink, they expand, which raises a final question. The Mormon Church continues to grow, over 17 million members worldwide, one of the largest welfare systems on earth, increasing political influence, expanding global real estate, a sophisticated investment portfolio. And with every generation of disciplined tithing, the financial engine accelerates. So is this good or bad? The answer, as always, depends on who you ask. Some see the church as a model of self-reliance, a disciplined community, a builder of humanitarian systems, a stable force in global instability. Others see a hyper-centralized institution, too much secrecy, too much wealth, a lack of financial transparency. Both views contain truth, and both are part of the story. Takeaway 1. Discipline compounds faster than money. Tithing wasn't just a religious rule, it was a cultural practice that created intergenerational financial momentum. Takeaway 2. Centralization creates power. By consolidating assets, the church built a system that could plan 50 years ahead while corporations planned 5. Takeaway 3. Every empire starts with a single decision. The Mormon Empire was built not by accident, but by a persecuted people in a desert who believed survival required organization, unity, and financial strength. It worked. As religious institutions adopt corporate structures, and corporations adopt religious-like loyalty systems, the line between faith and finance is becoming thinner than ever. If the 20th century was defined by nation-states and corporations, the 21st century may be defined by something more: hybrid organizations that combine belief, identity, and vast financial power. And the Mormon Empire, it might be the blueprint for what comes next. If you found this story intriguing, challenging, or eye-opening, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more deep dive documentaries, and drop a comment with the topic you want next. This is just one chapter in the story of faith, money, and power, and we're only beginning to uncover the rest. End.